The mailman doesn't deliver on a Sunday.
If you don't like that, you don't like NBA basketball.
Anthony for three. Bang! J.R. Smith! We just saw men fly. LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Cleveland! This is for you!
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast. I am Ronan Gaine. Joining me as always, Chris Nambu. The regular season has ended. We are heading towards the NBA playoffs. Lots more still to happen this year. We don't know how it's going to play out, but today we're going to be discussing some of the major takeaways from the regular season. We're not going to be looking ahead into the play-in or the playoffs just yet. We're going to be looking back on what's been a very interesting regular season. But before we get into that and before we discuss our kind of major takeaways, we got to discuss a few quick points. I know Chris is desperate to talk about Kenny Lofton Jr.'s big 40-point game, but I think the major story we got to start with has to be Rudy Gobert and the Minnesota Timberwolves. I mean, did it just finally reach boiling point between those guys? Is that something that's going to be forgotten about? Where are you at with that?
Listen, I thought Kenny Lofton Jr. was headlining this podcast. I agreed to do this podcast on the one condition that was our main topic. So we're already off to a tough start. But I guess we can talk about whether that was a punch. First of all, was that a punch or a shove? You tell me. Was that 50% shove, 50% punch?
He was like, I want to punch him, but I can't. I'm not allowed to punch him. I'll go for a shove.
Was it a bad? Does Rudy Gobert not know how to punch, or is he just? Was that like a hey, knock it off before I actually punch you kind of thing? I don't know. It was tough to tell. It was very complicated. You know, like his body language is off. Like he didn't really have his hips into it. So the mechanics. I mean, the shooting mechanics aren't there, and the punching mechanics aren't there. I don't know if this is skill. I don't know if this is an accident. I can't really tell. You tell me.
Yeah, I think it was kind of that sort of situation where I think he decided he thinks I'm gonna punch this guy, and then halfway through he's like, maybe I shouldn't do that.
In front of national television on our bench for everyone to see. To be fair, I mean, Kyle Anderson was kind of going in on him. So that, like, let's take it from that perspective. Like, everyone is like corroborating the fact that Gobert is playing hurt, and Kyle Anderson was repeatedly calling him a female dog, which, you don't do that. Questioning his manhood in front of everybody. And Rudy Gobert is, pretty infamously known to be quite insecure about his manhood. So I didn't think that was cool on Kyle Anderson's part. You just keep that stuff to the locker room. I think it's clear that Anderson's very much a emotional leader of the team at times, but like that, there's no reason for that to escalate to that point. That was I would not say uncharacteristic, because I think that's pretty characteristic of where the trajectory of this team has gone over the past 3 months. But man, I mean, just a tough sight.
Yeah, and then it gets worse for them because obviously the frustrations boil over from that, and McDaniels punches the wall and fractures his hand.
Yeah, man.
I mean, that's going to be a big. That's a huge blow going into the playing game against the Lakers.
It's a blow-in going into the play-in game, and it's ultimately a blow for them long term, at least as far as the playoffs goes. Because I think the Timberwolves, the Lakers, Pelicans, the Thunder, like all these teams believe that they can get through this and make a run. And I don't think the Timberwolves are making a run without McDaniel's defense. I think that injury right there sealed their fate to be a first-round exit, because they're not going to survive without him on the perimeter. At least for a 7-game series against all the elite talent in the West. So that is probably the biggest blowout of everything. I love that KG had talked about, or quickly tweeted out, like nothing like a little scuffle to get your juice flowing for the playoffs. And that's one way to look at it. I mean, obviously these guys are both like passionate competitors. They care. They're both arguing at each other for doing the right thing on the boards, doing the right thing on defense. And it's not, clearly not a personal thing, but it seems to me that it's not just two teammates that are really, it's not like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown getting in an argument, like two like equals or leaders. Like these are two veterans who should be, you'd imagine, be the steadying force of the team. And the one thing I noticed the most about this whole event is the fact that Anthony Edwards and Cat are kind of just on the bench, head down, not paying attention, like just like basically blocking out, like, all right, you're yelling at each other, whatever, we're just gonna leave it alone. Like there's no sort of leadership from your two most talented players, which I think always makes for a difficult locker room dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point, but it kind of feels like this is something that was that's been bubbling up for a while and was kind of almost, we needed to kind of see this sort of thing out of the Timberwolves. Let's see where it might lead to now. But before we get into our takes, then you want to give your boy Kenny a shout out then?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about greatest takeaways of the season, it's that I was 100% right about this kid coming out of the summer league. I mean, dude looked like a mixture of Shaq and Hakeem Olajuwon and a Dominican Sue, like all mixed into one athlete. It's just amazing to see. And then you told me, I remember it, I'm paraphrasing you, of course, but you said something to the likes of, don't get too excited. He's probably never going to see the floor in this season. And don't make me pull receipts because I know you said it. And this man scored 42 points, albeit in a game that maybe at the end of the day didn't matter. But in 38 minutes, guy scores 42 points. Looks like, at a bare minimum, a very, very valuable player for a team that just lost Steven Adams, probably for the, I mean, I think definitely right for the postseason.
Almost definitely,
yeah. It's interesting that this is now the second player we've seen get a stem cell infusion into their injury. That's not something we've seen before. I think Lonzo Ball also is getting something similar. But yeah, I mean, the Grizzlies are going to need a guy who's going to fulfill the rebounding that they lose from Steven Adams. If he can bring that offensive rebounding, this 42-point game is not going to continue, but that impact he's going to have on the boards, I think that matters. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly put a name in the conversation. They're going to look twice now. They're going to think about him when they're needing to fill minutes, and then even just a performance like that will make the front office, the coaching staff, even think about him more so during the off season and think about ways to integrate him more into the team moving forward. That's what a performance like that did. Like, I mean, he got his opportunity and he went out and took it. Let's see where he can lead it off from here.
Yeah, what an answer though. That, like, on the front office point, that they extend him, they sign him to a 4-year contract, which is like pretty unheard of for a two-way guy after his first year to get a 4-year deal. That's pretty unheard of. And then for him to immediately answer that and drop a 40-point game, like, you got to feel good as a GM for you to go out on a limb and sign a guy like that who hasn't shown anything except for being rookie of the year in G League, and then from drop 40 in an NBA game. That's great business. The Grizzlies just know how to make moves like that.
Yeah, they're smooth operators. All right, now let's get into the major stuff. We're gonna kind of work it as I'll announce when we have our major takeaways, but more broadly, we're gonna discuss points that have become very evident, or they almost seem so obvious, but at the same time, it's been a season where these sort of points have become very clear. And the started off, this whole season, it's been with a number of examples from the last off season, from the trade deadline this year. Teams can be a lot closer to contention than you think when you've got teams that have the guy or a top level duo. It's just all about the smaller moves that can get the right pieces around to ultimately make them into a contender. It doesn't have to always be that huge major trade, that huge major free agent signing, and we've seen that a lot this year.
Yeah, I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're not, developing a string theory. Like, it's not crazy to say that it's like the little pieces that matter, but I think so often we're so focused on, can we get that guy another star? Can we get another big talent on this team? Can this guy take it to the next level? When in reality, I mean, I think a lot of what we've seen this season, and I think the Kings are just the greatest example of this, and a lesson to everyone in the league that, teams are closer than you think, especially when you have the talent that they have. They really have the structure to bring in a coach, to bring an identity, and bring in a pure shooter like Herter, and those things meshed seamlessly. And I don't think we really pictured at all last season that a team like that, you just add in like 2 supporting pieces. I mean, a coach is probably the biggest supporting piece to a successful team, and a two-way shooter, dead-eye shooter. That's a massive piece. But I don't think if you just like said, oh, you're just 2 pieces away from a real legit playoff team, we would have called you crazy. And I think that's something to learn, that there's a lot more that goes into it than just getting the guy or that guy leveling up. It's what's really surrounding him and paying attention to the little details like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just looking at the Kings compared to last year, they were 30-52 last year, 12th in the West, 25th offensive rating, 27th defensive rating. This year, 48-34, third in the West, first in offensive rating, 119.4. They were 25th in defense, so defense still was a bit of a struggle, but an improvement is an improvement. They're going in the right direction, and that was really with having Sabonis for a full season, the addition of Herder, who's averaging 15 points per game, shooting on 40% from 3, adding a spark plug like Malik Monk coming off the bench, 13.5 points per game, and drafting well, Keegan Murray, 12 points per game, 41% from 3. I mean, it's those little moves, it's that overall completion that really turns a team, and it's great to see with the Kings. It's a great way that they've bounced back. They didn't have to add anything huge, but yet they are a top 3 seed in the West, and if anyone bet on that before the year, we would have thought they were crazy.
Yeah, and quick question for that. Do you think, there's been a lot of lamenting since the Halliburton trade? Do you think making the playoffs this season and seeing, and it's not just like, there's something different about how this team has made the playoffs, because this team has made the playoffs as with a new identity. Like this is a distinctly different culture, a different team than they were last year. Do you think it was worth it?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, before even start of the year, looking at what Halliburton was able to do in Indiana, and the Kings hadn't really fully got going yet, but they were on the longest non-playoff drought in the entire league. It's been 2006 the last time they were in the playoffs, so they've made the moves to get back in the playoffs. Not only have they got back in, they're a top 3 seed in the West.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely 100% right thing to do.
Yeah, different conversation obviously if they're in the play-in, but like just they are absolutely, I mean, they proved to be a top 5 team in the West. And that's in probably one of the most tough races in probably a decade, to say the least. And the Lakers too. The Lakers too was a team that I felt was impossible to fix. Totally impossible to fix. What moves can you make? There's just too many needs. And obviously we knew what they were missing. But I think we definitely underestimated the degree to which a small rearrangement of this roster to pieces that made sense would have unlocked this team again in a very real way. And this team, since the trade, has won 18 games. And I don't think that, I think when Schroeder had said they needed to win 19 games, something, we're like, yeah, okay, sure, you win 19 games. You're right. You're going to be in the 10th seed. You're going to be on the outside looking in. And they proved absolutely that all they needed was just functional pieces around LeBron, around AD, with this defensive minded team, and that they were going to be able to actually be a contender again. And I think most people can look at this team and legitimately say, with LeBron healthy, with AD healthy, and now sensible pieces, this is a playoff. This is not just a playoff team. This is a contender. And I think I underestimated for sure how much a small change like this would make. The addition by subtraction, not that Russ in and of itself was a bad player, but what he did took away from what the Lakers were trying to do as a team, and how impactful that was. Now, I don't think we predicted that to the degree at which it's come to play.
Yeah, I mean, it's been unbelievable. Obviously, Lakers, they've started the season 2-10. Were below 500 all season. They've been completely written off. We didn't believe AD or LeBron could stay healthy. They were both in and out of the team. Then they go and they add some shooting, they add some defense, they add some playmaking. Then they go 18-8 after the trade deadline. That's in a time where LeBron missed 13 games. And now they're looking like a team where a lot of people are tipping them to be making a few upsets. And some saying Western Conference Finals, some saying NBA Finals. Don't know if we're quite ready to hop on that bus, but think of they went from completely written off to that without making a ginormous, amazing move, which is what a lot of people were wanting them to try and do, like getting a guy like Kyrie Irving in. And it's worked really well. We also saw another team that were under pressure to add another star in Dallas, which we'll discuss later. And it hasn't worked out for them. They went and they got the big star, and it's completely gone the other way. The Lakers showed their patience, they showed their experience, they made the right moves, and now it's just a question of can they go on and do it now? We'll still wait and see. I think they'll go and beat the Timberwolves, and they'll be the 7th seed. So them up against the Grizzlies, that'll be a very interesting matchup. I think I'd be more confident in them beating the Nuggets than the Grizzlies. I'd be looking forward to seeing that matchup moving forward. But I think that brings me to my first major takeaway of the year, and that's based off this. And I think the Miami Heat are a team that are that little bit, that maybe that small bit, that big move from becoming a contender again. Obviously, last year they were the 1st seed in the East, 53-29. A top 10 offense, a top 5 defense. This year, 44-38, 7th in the East, 25th in offensive rating. They're still a top 10 defense, but they were the team that were being tipped when KD originally made his trade request, which was back in August. They were being one of the teams highly touted. It was kind of getting to that stage where it's like, we're going to have one more run with this team. We might as well go all in and add that next that other star. That obviously hasn't worked out. That's not going to happen, but I think that's a route that they should definitely explore in the off season. I think if they're going to go for it with this team, I think they need to make a drastic change. So I don't know how it's possible, but they can work it. But I would be looking at them and saying, if they were to pursue a guy like Kyrie Irving, I think that'd be a good fit and a good addition to this team, and would get them back up to the level that they're missing this year. They're that little extra spark that they're missing to be considered one of the top contenders in the East.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the Heat are the exception to this rule of well, actually that they're not actually this season. They're quite the opposite. What we've seen last season really is them cobblestoning players together to make a team work in a way that we didn't expect. And a lot of that kudos to their player development. But this season has looked the opposite. I mean, they did lead the league in games missed. So they by far just had the hardest time getting any continuity on the floor. Jimmy Butler doesn't seem to turn it on until post All-Star break, and Kyle Lowry just is not the guy they thought he'd be. Tyler Hero has had a solid season. Bam has had a solid season, but just as a whole, this team hasn't put it together in a very similar way that the Hawks haven't put it together consistently game to game. But I think the reason why you'd feel more confident in the Heat trading for a guy like Kyrie or another guy that I'm thinking of that we might talk about is that they as an organization, they know how to keep a culture. Like there's no question that whoever is coming into the Heat, like you are fitting into Heat culture. That the culture doesn't shift to you. So right now the question I think with the Mavs is like, who are the Mavs? They had an interesting go last season where it was Luka's team on offense, and then everyone bought in on defense. And if we're kind of oscillating between talking about the Mavs and Heat here a little bit, I think that's a big deal for Kyrie also, because does Kyrie want to be a part of a team where he has to fit the mold, or does he want to be on a team that accepts him for who he is? And I think the Mavericks have honestly been very low key and very accepting, and all the things that have been said don't seem forced. It seems like everyone has a general like positive energy about Kyrie's presence. And it's part of it's probably lip service or whatnot, but it seems like he fits there in a way that's comfortable and not forced. They're not trying to make him a hero. They're not trying to make him whatever. Like they accept him as a leader there. I don't know. I don't know if that necessarily specifically is a move that would work, but the Heat, I think I'm wondering why we don't look at the Heat differently, because we look at the Warriors and we look at them as, okay, they won a championship last year, so even though they had a bad year this season, they're going to figure it out. They're going to turn it on. But the Heat have shown that they also, I mean, they're always a force to be reckoned with once it comes to playoff time. Once you get into a 7-game series, like it's going to be a battle with them. So while I did say that all the games missed, I mean, you also are going to say like that's a product of why they had the worst season-long net rating out of all the 20 teams that are qualifying for the playoffs here. So they've just not been a good overall team throughout the whole season. But I think they deserve a little bit of confidence, more than we're giving them based on how they've performed before. That's just me.
Yeah, I think that is probably a fair point. I think I in my head, like I said it to you earlier, I think if the Heat were really ticking at this stage, I think they would have pipped the Brooklyn Nets and got the 6th seed. It might not make up too big of a difference when you think about it. Obviously, 6th seed, they would have faced Philly. Now they're likely. I think they'll beat the Atlanta Hawks. I think they'll get the 7th seed and obviously face the Celtics, who they took to 7 games last year. Now they won't be easy to shrug off, but to switch over and talk Celtics, I think in terms of teams being closer than contention, I know obviously the Celtics had that great year last year, went all the way to the finals, but then they had those issues in the offseason. Everything went on with Ime Udoka. You're kind of like, okay, what's going to happen now? But they made some really clever additions. They made some big power moves in the trade market, and they are now the best team in basketball. That's another takeaway I have for this year. The Boston Celtics are the best team in basketball. 57-25, second in the East. Only finished a game back on the Bucks. They're second in offensive rating, third in defensive rating, first in net rating overall. They got 5 players shooting 39% or better from 3. They got a duo in Tatum and Brown who are averaging 56.7 points per game. They got a 6th man of the year in Malcolm Brogdon. I mean, there's just no weakness within this team, and I don't see who is going to take them down going into the postseason.
Yeah, and I think what better way to compare and contrast like 2 different teams and 2 different cultures. And I think that's probably a big takeaway for me this season too, is that we started off talking about Gobert, we started off talking about Timberwolves and a lack of leadership there, and how, obviously losing breeds tension, losing breeds negative energy. But look at all the Celtics have been through the past 3 years. Like the up and downs and the doubts and the trade rumors and everything that's come with that. And especially you have that with 2 burgeoning young stars, and the typical narrative of having to split guys up just because one guy is, competing to be the guy. And they've just consistently not embraced that sort of typical mold. And I think I've always looked at Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum as, the potential like fulfillment of the what if of Tracy McGrady and Vince Carter. Like if those 2 guys had stuck together and not wanted to have their own, be the guy in their own team. And, aside from like some very scary reporting last month about Jaylen Brown and some comments he's made, I mean, the buy-in from this team from top to bottom and the culture that they've developed there, on top of just how good they are on the floor, it's impressive. It's professional. There's nothing negative to be said about this team outside of, that debacle that happened with Ime Udoka. And I think we gave maybe we gave too much credit to Ime for how he put this team together. I think it's clear to us now that a lot of that is internal. Like these are men that have come together in their own with the help of Udoka, but they are who they are because that's just the DNA of the Celtics at this point. And I think that's a massive takeaway for me because that tells me that this wasn't, we better win a championship before one of them gets upset and leaves. Like this is a team that's committed to be in contention for as long as these guys are healthy and long they're together, which, hopefully that's a decade.
Yeah, that's an interesting contrast compared to like obviously the Heat and who they faced in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They made the moves to sustain their level. The Heat, not as much. Obviously, injuries have had their impact on this team, but the Heat have failed to kind of to make those right moves to be able to sustain their level of productivity, which is quite interesting. But we won't go too overboard in it because I still don't fully want to ever rule out the Heat, but I think the Celtics will take care of business if it ends up being them in the first round matchup. But then we'll flip then to the other side of the.
Before we get off the Celtics, though, can I make one thing? Because we're talking Celtics and why they've been so good. Picture this: Grant Williams, a guy who we thought this season is going to be playing for a massive contract because of what he did last playoffs. And you talk about the moves. Obviously, you got Malcolm Brogdon, how good he's played. Derek White having a resurgence. Al Horford still shooting 1,000,000% from three. And then you have Sam Hauser, a guy who came out of nowhere, and it's comical because like he's getting in sometimes in games where it's like the Celtics are winning so easily that it's like, well, of course he's shooting 46% from three. Like the dude's playing against third stringers. This guy, and this is the noisy stat, but has the best individual defensive rating amongst qualified players in the league. And he's a guy who's played throughout the whole season. And he's shooting above 40% from three. So that's not to say put this guy in the all defensive team, but you see it on the floor. He's a very good defender. Like he's very solid. He's not going to be your point of attack, but they just have guys like that and are developing guys, bringing guys up that are the exact mold of what this team needs. And that is depth. That's another major takeaway before you get off the Celtics is their depth is just insane. You can lose Malcolm Brogdon. You got Derek White. You can lose Marcus Smart. You got Malcolm Brogdon, Derek White. And I mean, even Peyton Pritchard, a guy who's their fourth string. I think a lot of teams would be happy to be, a backup point guard and spot minutes. And what they had with the Luke Cornett experience for a little bit, and then they get Muscala, who's been a perfect pick and pop big, and just what this all has to come down to, Celtics management. And Celtics management has put together like the perfect team with the perfect star duo, and I guess we're done falling all over ourselves over the Celtics. But just to say like that, you're absolutely right. Best team, best players. Awesome coach, best organization, absolutely in the league this year. That's got to be number one.
Yeah, 100%. And we'll have to flip then to the other side of things, where we look at it and you think, as much as teams are close to the contention, teams are also so very close to the tank as well. It can very easily go both ways. We've seen that with a few teams this year, most notably, obviously, the Dallas Mavericks. I mean, obviously, went to the Western Conference Finals last year to now not being in the playoffs, not even in the play-in tournament. They went a different way to what the Lakers did. They were pressured to get Luka some help, pressured to get Luka that second star alongside them. They went and did that, but in doing so, they literally lost all of their defense, and it just blew up as a complete failure. So, I mean, it's amazing that it can work so in those ways, and it shows that there's a lot of importance that's on the front office and the guys making the biggest decisions in building the right roster around when you have a talented player and not listening to the noise and just sticking to your guns and making the right decisions.
Yeah, that's like the opposite effect where it's like I assumed that the Mavs defense would be bad, very bad. Losing Dorian Finney-Smith. But the depths to which they have fallen defensively to the point where they can't even beat an undermanned Charlotte Hornets team. That is so demonstrative to me that there's something fundamentally wrong with this team right now. You know, I believe in Luka, and I'll go out on a limb, and this might sound crazy right now, but I believe in a team built around Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Absolutely. I absolutely believe in that team because I witnessed how good that team was with Spencer Dinwiddie and Jalen Brunson. And just that formula of having a shot maker next to Luka and what having two elite ball handlers on the floor with good defenders around them, good 3-and-D defenders, like that worked. But they didn't have enough of that this season. And losing Dorian Finney-Smith, I mean, that was a straw that broke the camel's back. And if they're that far away, if they're that close rather to falling out of the playoffs and just being a completely dysfunctional team, you got to believe the opposite is true. And you got to believe that, you know, if they get this pick, that this is going to be the controversial thing. And I think maybe this is a topic for another podcast where, you know, we think about what's the best thing to do for this team right now. Because a lot of people would say, "Oh, trade that pick, go get somebody." Is that the best answer? That's a tough question to ask. But they at least have a chance to reload this summer, reevaluate, and if they're that close to being out of the playoffs, I think they're also that close to being a championship caliber team because you have Luka Doncic, and if he is signed on to this team, if he is committed to this team, and like I said, I feel like the vibes, all things considered, aren't that bad. They're really not. And I think Dallas gives him a perfect environment where he doesn't have the stress of the media like he does in some other cities. And he doesn't have the stress of, I think Doncic is very chill. Like he's not going to be the type to kind of pressure him for anything, which is on the opposite side. If he went to Miami, that's going to be a very different scenario with his buddy, Jimmy Butler. I don't know how much longer they'd be friends for if they're there playing together.
Yeah, that may be true. But that'll lead me to my third takeaway in thinking that it's always important to remember in all of this that talent alone does not win championships, does not make you the best, does not put you at the top. It's hard work, it's commitment. I mean, the guys are paid this big money to be in elite shape, to be able to do things that other guys can't do, and that's something that Luka needs to really take a look at and look at himself. Start of the year, he actually kind of looked in the best shape he ever had starting a season, and it actually looked like he was committing a bit more defensively. But then as the season progressed, he kind of regressed on that. It was back to being a bit just lethargic and not really clued in whenever it came to having to deal defensively. I mean, look, the guy had a career year in terms of points per game, steals, 2-point percentage, free throw attempts. The dude was off the charts, 32.4 points per game, 8.6 boards, 8 assists. I mean, when you got that level of talent, it's just a question of the work ethic. Is how determined are you to be the best, to be a winner? He's got to commit in a big way to getting himself in the best possible shape so he's able to do it on both ends of the floor, and he's able to, and just in general, the team are able to build around him then, and he's able to give all of himself, because there's a lot of times when you look at Doncic and he's just gassed out there. Like he's still able to do the magic that he can produce, but it's so often that he looks gassed, and it's kind of like you need obviously the roster around you so you don't have to do so much, but you also got to be at that level that you're in the elite shape you need to be able to do it for a regular season and be able to do it through a playoff run as well.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important. It's paramount to keep Kyrie. It's paramount to develop a guy like Jaden Hardy. Paramount to keep those guys and develop them and put the ball in their hands, because number one, you give Doncic rest. And I think you got to give him a break, but it's the fact that you have to give him a break for having such a load on his back, because he is going to be gassed, because he's not naturally a defensive player, but you need to put him in a situation where he doesn't have the reason or now excuse to not be competitive on the other end of the floor. So I think that's such a big thing. Is you look at Jokic, for example. What Jokic has done to be passable defensively, I think, is huge, because he's not an athlete. He's an athlete, obviously, but he's not a NBA level center athlete at all, which is why he went so far in the second round. And for him to do what he does to a passable level defensively, to be competing on the defensive boards, to be contesting shots, to use his intelligence in his hands to get in passing lanes and just do all those things, that's something that still inspires confidence in his teammates to be competitive on that end. When you got the lethargy, when you got the lack of activity, just the lack of want on that end, it's hard. I mean, who's a defensive leader on that team? They don't have a galvanizing leader on the defensive end who's like demanding everyone's attention, who's communicating on that end, who's demanding greatness and effort. They don't have that. So Luka's never going to be that, but Luka can't be a negative on that. And I mean, if we're wrapping up on Mavs, I mean, for takeaways, that was our team. I mean, that was my MVP. That was, their, at least coming into the offseason last year, I figured they would try to make more moves to make this roster make a little bit more sense, because I think it was unrealistic for them to expect to play that good a defense again. But there was a formula there that could have made it to the finals. There's a formula that could have won a championship with Luka, and I think they're still seeking that. And like I said, if they're that close to being here in the play-in, I think they're also that close to being right back in it.
Yeah, there's big pressure on this on both Luka Doncic and this Dallas front office to make important changes heading into the off season. But another team that were, well, I know I was certainly believing in before the start of the year was the Portland Trailblazers. I mean, we were having the return of Dame, the addition of Jeremy Grant, the rise of Anthony Simons, the addition of Gary Payton II, the way Josh Hart was going to play, Nurkic was coming back, and it all looked like it was this could have been the best ever version of the Portland Trailblazers in the Damian Lillard era.
That was a quote.
And then it just went to hell. I mean, Payton gone at the trade deadline, Josh Hart gone at the trade deadline. The team finishes 33-49, 13th in the Western Conference. I mean, they're another example of a team that looked like they were right on the bounce back. They were going to get back into the playoffs. They were going to be that competitor around a superstar in Damian Lillard, and it just all went the wrong way. And that leads me to my fourth takeaway. It's Damian Lillard just has to get out of Portland. I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't think he really wants it. But I mean, when you're having a career year, I mean, 32 points per game, he's averaging 32, 5 and 7 on 57 and 37, 91 splits, and the team isn't good enough around you to even make the play-in. That's just crazy. I mean, that he has to look at that and think, as much as he's not a ring chaser or anything like that, he's a competitor. He can't, that's not okay at this stage of his career.
It was tough. This is a tough season for the Blazers that we're now at the point where we're just, again, every single offseason demanding that he leaves, and he's not leaving, and he's making it so he couldn't possibly make it more clear that he wants to leave now. I mean, last season it was a question mark, and he made it ambiguous about his desire to leave if they don't figure things out. And I mean, at a certain point, it's like, it's okay if he wants out. Like, no one's gonna flame him for that. No one's going to be on him for that. But yeah, I remember we literally said this is the most complete team that he's had. And we weren't predicting they're gonna make the finals. We weren't predicting they're gonna necessarily even like make it to the Western Conference Finals. But with what they had going, I mean, even you remember the Justice Winslow period where they were playing Justice Winslow at like point center. I was like, whoa, where did this come from? This is fun. This is different. This is new. But I still think that the Josh Hart thing, once he got traded, it was like, oh, okay, they know and they're not. And maybe that was a responsible thing to do. Like they knew that even though this team looked better than last year, which is not a accomplishment by any measure at all, that they weren't going to make it far in the playoffs. And maybe that was a responsible thing. We'll see where the lottery odds land them, and maybe that's what they do to pivot. And then they have a choice. Then they have a choice to pivot away from Dame, or they have a choice to pivot towards trading away whatever top 4 pick that they have to keeping Dame. And either decision is pretty hard, because there's always been the conversation around whether or not Dame is going to win a championship as the best player on his team, which is the age-old question of every single player in this league besides LeBron James. Like who else are you going to put that mantra on? But they're in a tough spot. Do you have any immediate solution? Like Dame's here in the room, and you're like, Dame, you got to leave. And he's going to be like, okay, so where am I supposed to go? Do you have an answer for him?
I mean, it's tough, obviously, because like teams with what they'd have to give up to give up that and still be a competitor of Damian Lillard. I think it's more realistic that it'd be in the Eastern Conference. I actually saw this talked about today. I think one was the Celtics, which I don't think, unless the stuff about Brown not really liking it in Boston, stuff he hears, if that's true, that's the only way I'd see that coming to fruition. But you look at possibly the 76ers. They give up, did they give up Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey, whatever picks they've got? Bring Damon, whether it's with Harden or not. I think Damon and Embiid as a duo is pretty formidable. What sort of defense they can still have around that would be very interesting. I think they'd be an interesting one. The Knicks, maybe they probably wouldn't have enough. I mean, would they give them RJ Barrett, a whole lot of picks, maybe Emmanuel Quickly and a couple other young guys as well? That's a possibility. But yeah, it's very tough to find a situation that would work with the team giving up the assets they'd have to give up, but also still being a competitor once Dame got there as well.
Yeah. What about the Heat?
Yeah,
Hero,
I mean,
Robinson,
Tyler Hero,
Jovic.
Yeah, something like that.
I'm not sure if that's a stronger package than getting like a Barrett and a Quickly or a Maxey and picks. But I mean, regardless, if you compare the likelihood of either situation, I think it's probably more likely that another team is going to offer him a better situation than the Blazers are, because I think the thought is generally true that wherever Dame goes is going to be a somewhat similar situation to where he's at now. Mm-hmm. Somewhat similar situation to where he was at with CJ, because the assets it's going to take to get him there. Like, it's got to be an organization that can figure it out. I mean, the Heat proven that they can do something like to that degree, but I think the recent news about Cronin talking about wanting to target Jaylen Brown, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, it's nonsense. It's nonsense that the Blazers think that they've somehow put themselves in a position to get guys like that, and then compete with Dame. Like, you still just don't have enough, and maybe we'll just see in the offseason, but that is a major takeaway. Do you think this is that your takeaway, that this is Dame's last season in Portland? Will he be in New Jersey?
I hope he is, but I'm still I don't think he's gonna leave. I just don't believe. I think he wants to stay there. I think he wants to I think he'll be happy in himself to just retire as the greatest trailblazer who's ever played. But I would love to see him on a team that are set up to compete in a playoff situation. That's what my hope for Damian Lillard.
Yeah, I'm just really curious. How does Cronin think plan on getting Mikal Bridges? Because clearly he wasn't up for sale for 4 first-round picks. So he's really reaching on that one.
Yeah, a lot of reaching going on. We'll see how that one plays out. But then to finish out, then what a third of the broader aspect of it, the number of teams this year that were young cores, weren't really expected to do much, but actually ended up showing that they can compete, showing that they can challenge some of the better teams, but ultimately falling off. It's something that you see all the time. It's why it's so important to add experience. It's why guys always talk about experience when they first get to the playoffs, or when they first have their first winning season. Experience, and it stands to reason when you look at this year, especially. I mean, they can't sustain the success. The teams that have been led by young cores, young players, they can't sustain the success. I mean, obviously, you look at like the Rockets and the Spurs, they were clearly losing. They didn't have any interest in trying to win.
There's no success to sustain.
No. And
Yeah.
then you look at the Hornets and Pistons are kind of ones where you're like, they kind of wanted to be similar to like the Magic and the Pacers, I think, but obviously their league guys went down, so then they were happy enough to end up being tankers. Obviously Cade got injured early, LaMelo got injured early, so I think they might have worked out that way anyway, but I think they were happy enough to tank once those injuries that came about. They were kind of like, okay, that's actually pretty good now. We can just tank our way, hopefully towards Wembanyama. And then you look at the likes of Utah, the Pacers, the Magic. They went out and they tried to win. They wanted to win this year. They weren't saying, oh, we'll just tank it. Just Wembanyama, we got to get him. We got to be in the tank conversation. No, they just said, everyone's going to be doing that. We'll just go out and show the best versions of ourselves. But again, it fell short. The Jazz obviously had their drop off. They had great years out of a number of guys like Walker Kessler. Like obviously Markkanen was unbelievable. Plenty of other guys too. The Pacers, Halliburton really exploded onto the scene. They got a great impact from Mathurin as a rookie. The Magic, obviously Banchero, rookie of the year. They looked really, really good at times, but they couldn't keep it up. And that's just the interesting point of it all. Like, why is it that these young teams who just have nothing, they're going in there, nothing to fear, nothing else, there is the talent there, but why can't they just get to that level of even like getting around like the 40 win mark? Why is it so tough for that to happen?
I think there's a lot of things that plays into it. I think one, players will often talk about the conditioning, and that there's as an athlete, the growth that comes from being conditioned for a full 82 game season all year long. Like that's difficult, and that's something that takes time. So rookies, even second, third year players, like they're still maturing. And I think that's when you see players take big leaps, is when they're not just having a big game every other night or so, or once a week. It's like every single night, because they're conditioned. They're ready to do that all season long. And I think what plays into that too is like the injuries. Like young guys are not as sturdy as guys who've been training and competing and really fortifying their bodies for this for years. And I think just the locker room presence of that you don't have when you look at like the Celtics, for example. I think the Celtics were super unique in their first playoff run when Jason Tatum was a rookie, because they had veterans there. They had guys who were battle tested, who were ready for that. And I think even the Cavs are an interesting case of, being able to make some noise last year and to be in the playoff series, because they have a good mix of not just young talent, but also guys who are battle tested. And the Pacers, Miles Turner, veteran, sure. Buddy Hield, veteran, but they don't. I think the Pacers also lack the final pieces to the puzzle. Mm. And I think the Magic too are just too young. There's something about having the veteran presence that keeps things steady, keeps things going. So that's why I think it's even more impressive for teams like that to make it that far. And I think is a major indictment of greatness on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for the Thunder to be in the play-in right now. That where's their veteran presence? Where's that? And he is lifting up a team that is young, and he himself is a newly minted superstar in this league, and that's a big deal. And I think we haven't had a huge opportunity to talk about any takeaways for them this podcast, but if we're talking about what separates young guys and what separates these teams from others, who makes the playoffs, who doesn't, There's going to be that guy. Do you have that guy? And Shea, Banchero's too young. Like he's a rookie. Like he's not gonna make it that far that quick. Halliburton, I think he needs other players to make him great. I mean, Shea has fully realized himself as the best player on the court at times. Like he knows it. I mean, teams are defending him like the best player on the court. You have a guy like that, and that changes everything. This obviously goes against our whole big takeaway of, it's not just about talent, but in this league, you have a guy like that, and even though you have a young team, you make it.
Yeah, and that's the final takeaway for me. I mean, this whole season has been a testament that the Oklahoma City Thunder, without doubt, have got the brightest future on paper in the NBA, outside of kind of the playoff certs that there are in the league probably at the moment. But it's largely because of Shea, but like it feels like it could be the second coming for the Thunder. Obviously, they had that great drafting, great build up when they got KD, Russ, Harden. They built on success in that. Obviously, they ain't got a guy as talented as KD. There isn't many out there that have ever been in the NBA. They haven't got the explosive athlete that is Russell Westbrook. But what they do have then is Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, a 31 point per game scorer this year, doing a little bit of everything. Five boards, 5.5 assists, 1.6 steals, 1 block per game, shooting 51% from the field, shooting 91% from the free throw line, and over 10 plus attempts a game. And they got a guy like Giddey, who's just kind of a consistent 3-point shot away from being a really elite 2, playing alongside Shea. He can provide that high level of playmaking. He's a really good rebounder for a guard. You got a guy like Jalen Williams. He could be your kind of spark plug. He could be your guy coming off the bench. You got potential in Chet Holmgren. He could be a potentially generational big. We haven't obviously got to see that yet. So you look at it, and on paper, it all seems to add up. It all seems to be there. Like you said, they have that guy. Shea is that guy. But can this alone make them a top 6 team in the West next year? Or do they need to add some more veteran presences to be able to be at that level?
I think right now their most consistent big man, their most consistent 2-way big man, who unfortunately is hurt, is Cameron Williams. Great player, great energy guy, great rebounder, streaky shooter, a lot of activity on the boards, really switchable defensively, great guy. But having a big improvement, not just with having Chet out there, but getting other guys into the front court, that's gonna be huge, because they have great playmakers on the team. Jalen Williams, I don't think Jalen Williams will be a bench guy next. I think he'll absolutely be a starter. I think that's your starting wing of the future. And that's probably if you're gonna ask reasons why a team is going to be able to be in top 6 in East or West, that comes down to, do you have your starting wing? Like, is your wing rotation set up? And I think that's a major shortcoming of the Pacers, for example. I think that's set in stone. Jalen Williams is your wing, and he's a great playmaker as well. So you have Chet Holmgren, who I think is gonna struggle as a finisher, but as a mid-range shooter, we'll see as a 3-point shooter, and him as a playmaker too. That's the thing with this team, man. It's like they have they're completely amorphous. They have so many different ways to play. Like, you put the ball in anyone's hand, they can make the right pass. They've drafted high IQ guys who are instinctive passers, who are great on the boards, will run, who are smart enough in the half court, and it's just all the connecting pieces haven't quite fit there yet, which is why it's amazing that they're in the playoffs to begin with. Like, they haven't fully finished building this team out. And what is it going to take for them to be in the top 6 next season? Very little. Just the internal growth will happen. We've seen it. I mean, OKC is great at developing their players, and I believe that they have specifically brought in the shot doctor to get Giddey to the point where he's a better shooter. And what do they need? They just need some front court pieces, better depth from the center position. They're going to need that to help Holmgren out. The Steven Adams-esque kind of presence. They're going to need some shooters, and they have all the money in the world to do that.
Yeah.
So there's nothing really stopping them from a financial standpoint or a stylistic standpoint from, figuring out their roster and not being a massive improvement and being a lock in the playoffs next year. So brightest future, absolutely. Next year, playoff lock for sure. Year after that, years down the road, like Jalen Williams, that's a big question mark. How much better can he get? SGA, I think this is real. Like he's a superstar. Like every year he's going to be a guy. People are asking why he's not on the cover of 2K. Like he's a 2K athlete, and you don't have very many of them out there. So they're very exciting to me, and I'm pumped to see what they do if they make it in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's certainly going to be exciting. I think you got to be pumped up if you're an OKC Thunder fan right now, and just to watch how this team grows, considering how organically they've done it. It's just great as an NBA fan that you still want to believe that teams can build up through the draft and through smaller trades as well. But that's going to wrap up. That's our takeaways from the regular season. And now we move on towards the play-in and the playoffs. That's still to come. Play-in tournament starts Tuesday. We got Lakers, Timberwolves, Heat and Hawks. I think we're both pretty confident we're going to see the Heat and the Lakers winning those two games.
Yeah.
Chris, I think you're there with me.
We called that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then we'll see what happens with the Bulls and the Raptors. That's going to be a really interesting battle. I know Chris is a bit nervous on that one, but and then with OKC and New Orleans, that's another game that could easily go either way. It could come down to Brandon Ingram versus SGA, who can come out on top. But it's all going to be really exciting. And then the playoffs to come, we know some of the set matchups are going to be really fun. Knicks, Cavs, Clippers, Suns. There's going to be some great matchups. It's all ahead of us. But for now, thank you all so much for listening. My thanks to Chris for joining me. Remember, if you like what you're hearing, like, subscribe, follow us everywhere on social media. We are everywhere at Coast to Coast NBA. And most importantly, remember to take every shot and love every moment.
Peace out.